My brother told me, the morning it began, that he had solved the oldest problem in England. "I am going to hire a wife," he said, and set down his coffee as though he had announced a new drainage scheme for the East Field. I had known Julian all my life, which is to say I had known the cold Duke of Ravenmere longer than anyone else alive, and I had learned to read the small weather of his face the way a shepherd reads a sky. There was nothing in it that morning. That was how I knew he meant every word. "You cannot hire a wife," I said. "There are laws, there are vicars, there is mother who will haunt us both." "Not a wife, a betrothed." He turned the letter in his hand, the fourth that week. I would learn from our cousin Marsh, each one warmer and more menacing than the last. For the season, through the harvest ball, long enough to make the point and short enough to make no promises. Outside the long windows the Ravenmere gardens were going gold at the edges, the first cold morning of the autumn, mist standing in the low ground by the mere. Inside, my brother was proposing to purchase a lie and wear it like a coat until the weather turned. You must understand what drove a sane man to it, and my brother was sane, sane to the bone, sane past the point where most men would have wept and been the better for it. 3 years before, Julian had been engaged to a woman called Lady Cassandra Vale, who had a laugh like breaking glass and eyes that measured a room by its silver. He had loved her the way careful men love, all at once and without a rope. She had married a marquis with a larger house 11 days before the wedding, and she had done it in a letter, and the letter had been witty. He did not rage. That was the trouble. A man who rages spends the poison. Julian folded the letter into a small hard square and put it somewhere behind his ribs, and from that day the county had its cold duke, the man who did not dance, did not flatter, did not thaw, who ran Ravenmere like a garrison and gave the impression, at close range, of a door that had been locked so long the key was lost. And a locked door in our world is an irresistible thing. For 3 years the mothers of England had thrown their daughters at Ravenmere like waves at a cliff. They came to the autumn shooting, they came to the winter card parties, they arrived mysteriously when carriages broke wheels precisely at our gates. Julian bore it with a courtesy so complete it was its own kind of cruelty. But that autumn the siege had found a general. Our cousin, Lord Marsh, was a smiling man with soft hands and a hard purpose. He had a sister-in-law, Lady Sabine Marsh, beautiful, brittle, and as ambitious as her champion. And he had decided, with the patience of a man laying drains, that she would be the next Duchess of Ravenmere. Marsh held a portion of the old Ravenmere debts, a tangle from our grandfather's day, and he had begun to speak of them the way a man speaks of the weather when he means to say drought. "Marry where I wish," the letters implied, or discover how expensive a locked door can be. So, Julian said, a betrothed. Marsh cannot press Sabine on a man already promised, and a man already promised need not dance with anyone's daughter, nor explain himself, nor pretend to a warmth he does not have. At the ball I present her, through the season she reigns. When the frost comes she goes home richer than she came, and I am left in peace with a plausible broken heart, which everyone already believes I own. "And the lady," I said, "this hired lady, where does one order her?" He almost smiled. On Julian that was a landslide. "I have been thinking on it," he said, "and I believe the difficulty answers itself. I want no one who wants the coronet. That is the whole of the disease. So I want someone who needs the money and despises me for offering it. Pride and poverty in the same person. That woman will play the part flawlessly, because she will count the days until she can be quit of me. I want it on the record, since I am the one telling this, that my brother designed his own undoing with the care of a great engineer, and never saw the flaw until he was standing in the rubble. He found her 2 days later, and he did not have to look far because she came to him. I was in the estate room when they showed her in, and I will tell you exactly what I saw, because it matters later, when everyone pretended they had always known. She was perhaps 23, in a gray pelisse that had been good once and had been turned and mended since with a neat, unashamed hand. Her boots were country boots and honest about it. She had a wide, mobile mouth and dark hair coming loose at the temples from the ride, and she held a leather folder against her like a shield. She was frightened. Anyone could see she was frightened. What you could not see at first, and then could not stop seeing, was that she had decided not to let the fear drive. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied to Julian, and then, catching the second man in the room, gave me a smaller, uncertain one. "My lord, I am Tamsin Cade, of Cade's End by the Withy Brook. I have come about the note." The note. My brother's steward had explained it to him that morning, dry as a ledger. A mortgage against a small farm 3 miles east, 30 years old, my grandfather's paper, long forgotten among the estate's holdings, the sort of debt that sleeps for a generation and wakes when a man dies. Her father had died. She had found the paper among his affairs, along with a great many other papers, all of them demanding, and had done the mathematics of ruin at her own kitchen table, and had discovered that the largest single hand around her throat belonged to the Duke of Ravenmere. "You could have written," Julian said, not unkindly. He was simply a man who preferred a letter to a face. "I could have," she agreed, "but a letter is easy to refuse. I thought if you must refuse me, you should have to do it while I stand here." She lifted her chin the barest degree. "I have come to ask for time, your grace, not forgiveness of the debt. Time. My father left a good deal and a farm that is worth working, and a brother of 12 who did not choose any of it. If I have until Lady Day, I can bring in the harvest and sell the eastern strips and pay the interest at least, and show you good faith. If you call the note now, I lose the land, and my brother his home, and there is nothing after that I would care to describe to a duke on a fine morning." She stopped. She had said more than she meant to. Her hands on the folder had gone white. There was a silence in that room that I remember better than most conversations. Julian looked at her the way he looked at a horse that had refused a fence for the first time, not with anger, but with a sudden, arrested attention, as though the world had done something slightly other than he expected. "Miss Cade," he said, "sit." "I would rather stand." "You would rather not owe me the chair." He almost smiled again. "Twice in 1 week. I began to worry for the roof." "Very well, stand and hear me, because I am about to offer you something worse and better than time." I should have left. A gentleman would have left. I stayed, and I have never once regretted it. "I have a difficulty," my brother said. "That is the opposite of yours. You have too little and are drowning in what is owed. I have too much and am besieged for it. There is a woman my cousin wishes me to marry, and 100 others besides, and I have no intention of marrying any of them and no peaceable way to say so. A betrothed would end it, not a wife. A betrothed, a lady on my arm through the autumn season, at the ball, at the table, in the eyes of the county, so that no mother in England may put her daughter in my path without embarrassing herself." He let that settle. "It would be a performance, Miss Cade, some weeks of it. At Michaelmas we should be radiantly engaged, by the new year sadly and privately not, and in exchange—" "No," she said. "In exchange, every debt against Cade's End is cancelled. The note, the interest. Whatever else your father left, brought to me and paid, so that you walk home owing no man anything, with the land free and your brother safe, and enough besides to see him schooled." He spread his hands, a man laying his whole hand on the table at once. "It is a small piece of work, Miss Cade. A few weeks of smiling at a cold man. I am told I am not difficult to look at, only to like." I watched her want to throw it in his face. I watched her, quite clearly, run the same mathematics she had run at the kitchen table, and I watched the answer come up, as it must, on the side of the boy of 12 who had not chosen any of it. "You want me," she said slowly, "to lie to the whole of your county." "I want you to be paid to be admired," Julian said. "Which is what marriage is, only I am offering it without the marriage." "That is a wretched thing to say." "I am a wretched man. That is rather the point of the whole arrangement. And this time it was not a smile so much as the ghost of one gone before it arrived. "You need not decide now. Take the folder home. Do your mathematics. If the answer is no, I will grant your time. You have my word on the note. Either way, I am not a villain who bargains with a family's roof. But if the answer is yes, then come back Thursday, and I will teach you to be the future Duchess of Ravenmere. And you will hate me the entire time, and we will get along famously." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked, I noticed, not at his title, nor his coat, nor the size of the room, but at his face, as if she were the one deciding whether he could be trusted, which no one had done in that house in 3 years. "If I say yes," she said, "there are terms." "There always are. My brother is not part of the performance. He does not come here, he is not paraded, no one uses him, and when it ends clean. No pity. No pension left quietly at the farm as though I were a servant turned off. I take what is owed and not a shilling of what is not." Her voice did not shake. "I will play your betrothed, your grace. I will not be your charity." And my brother, the cold Duke of Ravenmere, who had not been surprised by another human being in 3 years, inclined his head to a girl in a turned gray pelisse, as though she had just taught him something. "Agreed," he said. "She came back Thursday. I wish I could tell you the performance began badly, because it would make a better story of learning. In truth it began, in a small way, beautifully, and that was the danger no one had costed. We had a fortnight before the season proper, before the house filled with cousins and colonels and the daughters of ambitious mothers, before the shooting parties and the card tables, and at the far golden end of it, the harvest ball. A fortnight to build a betrothed out of a farmer's daughter. My mother, the dowager, had been let into the secret. There was no keeping a house of 40 servants dark from her, and besides, we needed her, and she had received the whole scandalous scheme with a stillness that I mistook at the time for disapproval. "You wish me," my mother said to Julian, "to school a stranger to pass as your bride, deceive the county, and be turned out at Christmas." "Yes," Julian said. "How interesting," said my mother, "that you should choose to be deceived by someone honest." And she went to meet Miss Cade with an expression I had not seen on her since before Cassandra Vale. They ought to have hated each other, the Dowager Duchess and the debtor's daughter, and instead I came upon them the second afternoon in the yellow drawing-room, and my mother was laughing. Actually laughing, a rusty, astonished sound. Tamsin Cade sat very straight with her hands folded, learning which fork was which and who outranked whom, and how to enter a room full of people who wished you ill without appearing to notice any of it. And every so often she would say something so dry, so exactly aimed, that my mother forgot to be a duchess. "You will find," Mother was saying, "that Lady Sabine Marsh will attempt to make you feel small at the first opportunity." "That is a comfort," said Tamsin. "I have been made to feel small by experts. Creditors, your grace, are far better at it than any lady. A lady sneers, a creditor takes the roof. I shall find Lady Sabine restful." Mother laughed, and I, standing in the doorway, thought, oh, just that, oh. She learned everything they set her, and fast, because she was clever and because she was proud and would not be caught out. But the thing they could not teach her, she brought already, and it was the thing that undid us all. She was kind without calculation. She learned the names of the servants in 3 days and used them. She noticed that old Purring, the butler, had a bad hip and arranged, without a word to anyone, that the fires in the rooms he tended were laid the night before so he need not kneel to them in the cold. She found the stable boy weeping over a mare who would not foal and sat with him in the straw at 2 in the morning, ruining a borrowed gown, and the mare foaled, and the boy would have walked into the mere for her after that. Julian noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. It was his curse. He had designed a woman who would count the days, and he had gotten instead a woman who mended his house without being asked, and he did not know what to do with her, and so he did what he always did with a thing he could not master. He grew colder. Their rehearsals were terrible to watch and impossible to look away from. They practiced the engagement as a general drills a regiment. How he would take her hand as they entered the great hall. How she would look up at him, not adoringly, Miss Cade. No one will believe you adore me. Look at me as though you have decided to tolerate me, which is far more convincing. How they would stand close enough to signify and far enough to survive. They rehearsed a lie until it had choreography. You are stiff, Tamsin told him on the third day, exasperated. You take my hand as though you have been handed a fish. I'm aware of how I take your hand. Then take it as though she stopped, and I saw her decide to be reckless, which was always her most dangerous mood. As though you were glad of it. Have you never in your life been glad of anyone's hand, Your Grace? The question landed somewhere it should not have. I watched it land. Julian went very still, and for one moment the cold Duke was not in the room, and a much younger man was, one who had been glad of a hand once and had learned better. Then he shut the door on it, the way he shut every door. Take my arm, Miss Cade, he said. We will try again. But that evening, walking the terrace after dinner with the mist coming up off the mere, I heard him say to her, out of nothing, You should not sit up all night with mares. Someone had to. There are men employed to sit up with mares. They were asleep, said Tamsin, and the mare was frightened. Being frightened alone is the worst thing there is, Your Grace. I would not wish it on a horse. She said it lightly, but it was not light, and my brother heard the whole weight of it. A girl who had done her mathematics of ruin alone at a kitchen table, frightened, with no one employed to sit up with her. He did not answer, but he did not walk away either, and the two of them stood at the terrace rail a long while, not touching, not rehearsing, saying nothing, while the mist rose and the last light went off the water. I left them there. I told myself it was courtesy. It was, I think, the first time I understood that we had all made a terrible and wonderful mistake. The season came in like a tide, and with it the county, and with the county came the test of the whole enterprise, and Tamsin Cade passed it so completely that I began to be afraid. They arrived over 3 days, the shooting men and their wives, the widowed aunts, the marriageable daughters and the mothers steering them, and at the head of the whole flotilla our cousin Marsh, smiling, with Lady Sabine on his arm like a drawn sword. I watched Sabine take in the news of my brother's engagement, for we had let it be known, a fortnight of careful rumor, so that no one arrived in ignorance, and I watched her decide in the space of a breath that whoever this Cade creature was, she was a fraud and would shortly be exposed as one. She was not wrong. That was the terror of it. She was hunting for exactly the truth, and she had a hunter's nose. But Tamsin met them all as the future Duchess of Ravenmere, and she did it not by pretending to a grandeur she did not have, but by declining, gently, to pretend to anything. When Lady Sabine remarked, over the first dinner, in a voice pitched for the table, that she did not believe she had heard the Cade name in town, Tamsin agreed that she had not, and that town would find the Withy Brook a very long way to travel to hear it. When a colonel's wife asked, too sweetly, what her people were, she said her people were farmers now and had been soldiers before that, and a bishop once, a long time ago, who by all accounts had been a scoundrel. We have declined and improved by turns for 400 years, she said. This season I am told we are improving, and the table laughed, and even Sabine's mouth tightened into something that was nearly a smile because she could not help it. She should have made enemies. Instead she made the room like her, which is a far more useful and far more dangerous thing. And through all of it Julian stood beside her, and did the one thing he had rehearsed worst and now, mysteriously, did best. He was glad of her. I do not think he knew he was doing it. That was what made it impossible to counterfeit. He would forget to be cold. She would say something dry down the table, and I would watch my brother's mouth move, against his will, into an expression I had almost forgotten he owned. She had a way of laying 2 fingers on his sleeve to steer him toward or away from a conversation, a rehearsed signal, entirely practical. And I began to notice that he leaned into it a half-second before her fingers arrived, as though he had learned the shape of her hand and gone looking for it. Marsh noticed too. Marsh noticed everything that could be turned to money, and he watched my brother across the card tables with the patience of a man who has decided to be very sure before he strikes. "He is fond of her," Marsh said to me one night, idly cutting a deck he did not intend to deal. "The little brown farm girl, how touching. Where did you find her, Kit? I confess I cannot place the family at all." "By the Withy Brook," I said. "You would not have been. It floods." He smiled at me, and I understood that he did not believe a word of the whole arrangement and had begun, quietly, to dig. "It is only that Julian has been so very impervious for so very long, and then all at once a stranger. It seems sudden. Sudden things," said my cousin, "so often come apart." I went to Julian that night and told him Marsh was hunting. My brother received it the way he received everything unwelcome, which was to say, without moving a muscle. "Then we shall be very engaged," he said, "and very convincing, and give him nothing to find." And he was quiet, and then he said, in a different voice, one I had not heard him use in 3 years, "She is not enjoying it, Kit. I want you to know I have not lost the thread. She is not, this is not agreeable to her. She counts the days. It is what I asked of her." But he was wrong, and I think he knew he was wrong and could not afford to know it. Because I had seen Tamsin Cade at the Frost Fair the week before, when the whole party had gone down to the mere, which had frozen early and hard that year, black ice with the leaves caught under it like pressed flowers. I had seen her skate badly, laughing, gripping my arm, and I had seen my brother stand at the edge of the ice in his greatcoat, not skating, never skating, and I had seen him watch her with an expression that had nothing to do with any arrangement, and I had seen her look back at him across the ice with the same terrible, unrehearsed thing in her own face, and both of them looked quickly away, as though they had each been caught stealing from a house they had agreed to leave. That was the winter it all should have gone smoothly and did not, and I am glad of it every day of my life. It was the boy that broke it open in the end. It was Tom. The terms had been plain. The brother is not part of the performance. And Julian, who kept his word the way other men keep their pulse, had honored it absolutely. Tom Cade had never once been sent for, never paraded, never used. But a boy of 12 alone at a farm 3 miles off, with his sister vanished into the great house, and only the hired men for company, is a boy who will do something foolish. And in the 3rd week of the frost, Tom Cade walked out onto the mere alone at dusk to look at the pressed leaves in the ice, and went through it where the current ran warm beneath, out past the willows where no one had thought to warn a lonely boy. A cowman saw it and ran to the house, and I have never seen a room empty so fast, and I have never, before or since, seen my brother move the way he moved that night. He was on the ice before any of us had our coats. He went out flat on his belly toward the black hole in the white where a boy's mittened hands were scrabbling at an edge that broke and broke again, and the ice was groaning under him like a live thing, and men were shouting for ropes and hurdles, and Julian did not wait for the ropes. He put himself out over water that would kill a man in minutes, spread wide so the ice would hold him, and got one hand, around the boy's wrist as Tom went under the second time, and held. Just held, and would not let go while the ice cracked white around them both, and would not let go when a great slab tilted under his own weight, and would not let go until the men had the hurdles laid and the rope round his ankles, and he came back across that dreadful ice on his belly with a half-drowned boy locked against his chest, and both of them the color of the water. They carried Tom up to the house and put him in blankets by the great hall fire, and he lived, coughing and terrified and alive. And it was only when the boy was breathing steady that any of us thought to look at the Duke, who had gone through the same ice, and found him sitting on the floor by the hearth, soaked, shaking, with his cousin's smooth voice somewhere behind him already remarking on the extraordinary devotion of it. And Tamsin Cade on her knees in front of my brother with her hands framing his frozen face, saying his name, not his title, his name, over and over, Julian, Julian, look at me. You are all right. Look at me, and my brother looking at her, only at her, as though she were the fire and the county and the whole warm world. She caught herself. I watched her catch herself, watched the terms come back to her, the performance, the watching eyes, Marsh's smile, Sabine's narrow gaze, and I watched her take her hands from his face as though it cost her more than the debt ever had, and rise, and become the future Duchess again, composed, correct, wringing out her sleeves, thanking the men, ordering broth and warm bricks and dry clothes in a voice that only shook a little. But my brother, sitting on the floor of his own great hall in front of the whole county, did not perform at all. He watched her cross the room to see to her brother, and he said, quietly, to no one, in a voice I do not think he meant to be heard, "I would have gone through it 100 times. I heard it, Marsh, God help us, heard it. And I understood, standing there dripping in my brother's hall, that the arrangement was over, that it had been over for weeks, and that the only two people who did not know it were the two who had signed it. He tried to hold the line. I will say that for him. The next morning Julian sent for me, gray and controlled, having plainly not slept, and told me that the season would proceed as arranged, that the ball would go forward, that at the new year the engagement would be quietly ended and Miss Cade would go home with her family's debts cancelled as promised, and that this was the honorable course and he would hold to it. You went through the ice for her brother, I said. I would have gone through the ice for any child. You told the whole county you would go through it 100 times. He looked at me. For the length of a breath the door was not locked, and behind it I saw the truth of him, and it was not cold at all. It had never been cold. It had only been afraid, the way a burned man is afraid of a fire he still, God help him, wants to sit beside. And what would you have me do, Kit? He said, very low. Keep her. On what terms? I hired her. Do you understand? Whatever she does, whatever kindness she shows this house, whatever her face did last night by that fire, I bought it. I sat in that estate room and I offered a drowning girl money to smile at me, and she took it because her brother needed a roof. And if I go to her now and tell her I have come to feel as I feel, she cannot say no to me. She cannot. I hold her family's whole future in a folder in my desk. A woman who owes you everything is not free to refuse you anything. And I will not take a woman's yes when she is not free to give me her no. His voice had risen, he brought it down by main force. She made me promise, no pity, no charity. She is the one honest thing that has walked into this house in 3 years, and I will not repay her by making her the most expensive kind of kept woman there is. She goes home free. That is the whole of what I have to give her. Freedom from me. It was the noblest thing I ever heard my brother say, and it was entirely wrong, and I did not have the wisdom to tell him so. I was young. I thought perhaps he was right. I did not yet understand what I understand now, that a man so determined not to buy a woman's love that he will not let her offer it freely has simply found a grander way to lock the door. So the season went on, and it was quietly unbearable to watch. They were flawless in company and ruinous alone. In the great hall they were the radiant, engaged couple, and Marsh's face got sourer by the week. But I came upon them once in the long gallery in the blue hour before dinner, standing apart at the great window with the whole frozen park below them, and neither of them saying a word, and the not saying so loud I could hear it from the door. And I came upon Tamsin, another time, alone in the yellow drawing-room, holding the folder. She had asked to see the papers, the debts, all in order, holding it in her lap and looking at it as though it were the bars of a cage, which it was. And Marsh dug and dug, and at last Marsh found what a man will always find if he pays enough clerks to look. The note. The old mortgage on Cade's end. The paper trail of a debt cancelled by a duke a fortnight before he became mysteriously, suddenly, engaged to the debtor's daughter. He did not have the whole of it, but he had enough to hang the truth on, and Marsh was not a man to waste a rope. He chose the harvest ball to spring it. Of course he did. He was a connoisseur of the largest possible audience. The harvest ball at Ravenmere is the oldest thing we do. 300 years, the county has come up the avenue of limes to the great house at the turn of the year, and the whole of it is lit. Every window, every sconce, the long gallery a river of candlelight. The great hall cleared for dancing and hung with the last of the season's flowers and the gold of the harvest, wheat and apples and late roses, so that you walk in out of the black frost into a room that smells of summer and beeswax and is warm as a held hand. Tamsin came down the great stair that night in a gown my mother had given her, not lent. Given. I noticed that and said nothing. A deep russet silk the color of the beech woods with my grandmother's topaz at her throat, and she did not look like a farmer's daughter got up as a duchess. She looked like herself, only lit. The whole hall turned. My brother stood at the foot of the stair, and I saw him forget entirely for one unguarded moment that any of it was a performance. He simply looked up at her the way a man looks at the one good thing in his life coming toward him, and the county saw it, and the county sighed, because a hard man softened is the oldest and dearest story there is. Marsh saw it too, and chose that exact moment God wrought him to strike. He did it beautifully, I will grant him that. He waited until the first sets had formed and the room was at its fullest, and my brother had led Tamsin out for the opening dance, the two of them turning in the candlelight, and for once not performing at all, only close, only glad, her hand in his and his eyes on hers. And then, as the music ended and the floor stilled and the whole warm room was watching the golden couple, Marsh raised his glass and his smooth carrying voice and proposed a toast. "To my cousin," he said, "and his most fortunate bride, most fortunate indeed." A ripple of polite agreement. Though I confess I am puzzled, and I hope the family will indulge an old cousin's curiosity, for we are all friends here. His smile. God, his smile. Miss Cade, your family's difficulties are not, I think, a secret in your own parish. The Withy Brook is a small place in talks, and yet I find on inquiry that every debt against Cade's end was, how shall I put it, satisfied in full by this very house. A fortnight, as near as my clerks can reckon, before this happy engagement was announced. He turned to the room, all warmth, all wounded confusion. I ask only because I love my cousin and would not see him imposed upon. Tell me it is not what it appears. Tell me the Duke of Ravenmere has not simply purchased his bride. The word landed in that warm room like a stone through ice. I have replayed the next moment 10,000 times, and it never loses its power to stop my breath. The whole hall turned to Tamsin. My brother took one step forward. I saw him do it. Saw him open his mouth to take the blow onto himself, to lie, to claim it, to burn his own name to save hers. And Tamsin Cade put her hand flat on his chest and stopped him. She stepped past him into the middle of that vast, silent, candle-lit floor, alone in the russet gown, with her chin up and her hands perfectly still, and she looked at Marsh, and then she looked at the whole watching county, and she did the one thing no one, not Marsh, not Julian, not I, not she herself an hour before, could have predicted. She told the truth. "You are quite right," she said. Her voice was clear and it did not shake. "Every word of it. The Duke paid my father's debts, all of them. A fortnight before we were engaged." A gasp went round the room. She waited it out, calm as still water. "I came to this house in the autumn to beg for time on a note I could not pay, and I left it with an arrangement. His Grace required a betrothed to end the attentions of a great many people in this room, if we are all being friends and honest together, and I required my brother to keep his home. So we struck a bargain, Lord Marsh, exactly as ugly as you have made it sound. I was to play his bride through the season and be paid in my family's freedom and go home at the new year. It was a small piece of work. Those were the very words." She turned slowly and looked at Julian, only at Julian, across the whole gold room. "That is the truth, and you shall have all of it. But you shall have the rest of the truth too, since we are telling it. And then I will remember this if I remember nothing else." She reached into the little reticule at her wrist and drew out a folded paper, and I knew it at once, because I had seen it in the estate room desk. The arrangement in Julian's own hand, the terms, the debts, the whole bargain set down and signed. "This is what he bought," she said, and held it up so the candlelight came through it. "A performance. Some weeks of smiling. He was very clear. He is a careful man. He wished no misunderstanding. He wanted no one who wanted the coronet, you see. He wanted someone who would count the days." Her voice caught the first crack, the only crack, and she mastered it. "And I did count them, Lord Marsh. God help me, I counted everyone, but not the way he intended. I counted them the way you count the days of a summer you know is ending. Because somewhere in the middle of the lie I stopped acting, and I did not tell him, because he had bought my smile and I would not sell him the rest of it. I would not have him think that I, of all the women who have thrown themselves at this house, had learned to want the man because I could not have him for free." She tore the paper. She tore it in half and in half again, standing alone in the center of the harvest ball, and let the pieces fall. "So there is your answer," she said to Marsh, and her voice rang now steady as a bell. "There is no arrangement. It is void. I release him before all of you from every term of it. The debts he canceled were justly owed, and I will pay them back to the last farthing if it takes me the rest of my life, from the farm, with my own 2 hands, as I meant to before he ever offered me a shorter road. I take nothing from this house. I owe it nothing, and I am going home." She dropped into a curtsy, to the room, to the county, deep and perfect and final. "I wish you all a very good night, and a good harvest." And she turned and walked the whole long length of that silent golden hall, past every staring face, past Sabine's open mouth, past my mother, whose hand had gone to her heart, walked out, alone with her head high, into the black cold, having thrown away the only rope out of her ruin rather than let one soul in England call her bought. For the space of 3 heartbeats, no one in that hall moved. Then my brother came apart, and it was the most alive I have ever seen a human being. He caught her on the steps. I know because I ran after them both, half the county did, God forgive us, spilling out onto the frozen terrace into the torchlight and the cold. And so there were witnesses, dozens of them, and it is just as well, because if I told you what my brother did with no one to swear to it, you would think I had improved the story. She was 3 steps down, in the russet silk, in the killing cold, with no cloak, walking fast toward the dark and the long road home, and he came through the great doors behind her like a man coming through ice, and he said her name. Just her name, Tamsin. She stopped. She did not turn. "You tore up the wrong paper," my brother said. Now she turned. Her face in the torchlight was wet and furious and unbearably brave. "There was only one paper, Your Grace." "There were 2. He came down to her slowly, his breath white on the black air, the whole county frozen in the doorway behind us, and he did not lower his voice because, I understood this later, he had spent 3 years keeping every true thing behind a locked door, and he had decided at last, on the coldest night of the year, to say one of them loud enough that it could never be taken back. "There was the arrangement. You have very effectively destroyed it. I am obliged to you." A breath. "And there is the other thing which was never written down, because I was too great a coward to write it, and which you have just accused me, in front of my entire county, of not feeling, and there, Miss Cade, you are wrong, and I will not have it said. Julian, you said I bought your smile and you would not sell me the rest." His voice was not cold. It had never once, I understood in that moment, been cold. It had only been a fire behind a door, and the door was open now and would not be shut again. "You are mistaken about the whole of it from the first day. I did not want a woman who would count the days. I told myself I did. I designed the entire wretched scheme to make certain I could never be glad of anyone again, because I had been glad once, and it cost me a peace I did not get back, and I decided I would rather be cold to the grave than be that stupid twice." He was close to her now, on the icy step, both of them shaking, and neither of them from the cold. And then a girl in a Mendied pelisse walked into my estate room and refused to sit down because she would not owe me the chair, and sat up all night with a frightened mare because being frightened alone is the worst thing there is. And I have not had a single cold hour since, Tamsin. Not one. And I have been lying to myself about it far longer than either of us has been lying to the county." She had begun to cry in earnest now, silently, the way proud people cry. "I did not court you," he said, "because I held your brother's roof in my desk, and I could not take a yes from a woman who was not free to give me her no. Do you understand? That was the only honorable thing I had left to give you, your freedom. To let you go home owing me nothing, so that whatever you felt or did not feel, no one could ever say I had bought it." He drew a breath that shook. "But you have just in front of the whole county thrown my rope back in my face and torn up my hold over you and made yourself free, gloriously, ruinously free, you impossible woman. You have freed yourself of me on the coldest night of the year with no cloak on, and so—" And there, before all of us, the Duke of Ravenmere went down onto one knee on the black ice in front of his whole assembled county, and took her cold bare hand in both of his. "And so I may finally ask you the thing I have wanted to ask since the night by the mere, without a single debt between us to make you say yes. There is nothing owed. You are free. Marry me, Tamsin, not for the season, not for the county, not to end anyone's attentions. Marry me because I have been glad of you every day since Michaelmas, and I am done, I am finished, pretending to be cold in a house you have made warm. Come home, not to the arrangement, to me. I have been to a great many weddings since, and heard a great many fine words, and I have never heard anything to touch a proud, frozen man kneeling on the ice with nothing left to bargain with, asking a girl who owed him nothing to have him anyway." She looked down at him for a long moment. The torches guttered. The whole county held its breath. "You take my hand," she said unsteadily, "as though you have been handed a fish." And my brother laughed, a real laugh torn out of him, the first I had heard in 3 years, and she went down onto the ice beside him, russet silk and all, and took his cold face in her 2 hands the way she had by the great hall fire, and said his name once more. Only this time she was not frightened, and neither was he, and she said, "Yes, you wretched, wretched man. Yes." The county, I am pleased to report, went perfectly mad. Even Marsh, had the grace to look, for one moment, like a man who has staked everything on the belief that no one is ever really glad of anyone, and lost. They were married at the turn of spring, in the small church by the Withy Brook, not the great cathedral, her choice, and his gladness at her choice, with Tom Cade standing up beside his sister, a boy who had gone through the ice and come out the ward of a duke, scrubbed and terrified and grinning. She paid back the debts, too. She insisted, and Julian, who understood her by then better than he understood himself, let her every farthing over years from the farm, which she would not sell and would not be parted from, and which is, to this day, the best-run land in the county, because a woman who has done the mathematics of ruin at a kitchen table does not forget how to make a thing pay. The cold Duke of Ravenmere melted, and the county pretended it had always known he would, and the mothers of England took their daughters elsewhere, and the house filled up over the years, with fires laid the night before for a butler's bad hip, and mares that foaled because someone sat up with them, and a great deal of dry, exact laughter down a long table, and children, but that is another story, and their own to tell. I asked her once, years after, I was godfather to the eldest by then, and we had grown to be great friends, my brother's wife and I, whether she had planned it that night at the ball, the tearing of the paper, the walking out, whether it had been the boldest gamble in the history of the county, a woman betting her whole future that a man would break and follow. She looked at me as though I had said something very foolish and rather dear. "Plan it," she said. "Kit, I meant every word. I was going home to the farm to muck it out with my own 2 hands for the rest of my life. I would rather have done that till I died than have one soul call me a thing your brother bought." She smiled then, and glanced across the room to where Julian stood, the feared Duke of Ravenmere, on the floor with his son, entirely undignified, entirely gone. I did not walk out to make him follow. I walked out because I would not be kept. That he came after me was not the plan. That, she said, and her voice was not quite steady even then, all those years on, was the gift. He had set out, my brother, to hire a woman who would count the days until she could be quit of him. And he had gotten, instead, the one who tore up the contract, threw away the money, walked out into the cold with nothing, and thereby became the only person in the world he could ever have believed. Free of every debt, owing him nothing, wanting him anyway. He built the door to keep the warmth out. She was the one thing that came through it. And to the end of his life, and it was a long, warm, laughing life at Ravenmere, by the mere where the leaves press into the ice. He never once, that I saw, was cold again.